Welcome to the IoT Podcast. Today I am joined by Mr. Cees Links, General Manager at Qorvo. Cees, thank you very much for your time today and thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So we've been wanting Cees on the show for some time. For those that have been following us for a little while, you of course know exactly who Cees is. Cees is considered as one of the founding fathers of Wi-Fi. And today he's going to be talking a little bit about what his career has been in Wi-Fi, what he does at Qorvo, and talking about Wi-Fi 6 and the officeless office. So Cees, first of all, how did you actually start your career in Wi-Fi? Could you go into that for us, please?
Yeah. Let me first say success has many fathers, right? And failures are orphans. But I was involved. I think my first Wi-Fi presentation was in 1988. And actually, it was pretty soon after cordless telephones had become somewhat of mainstream. And what we saw is that computers became portable. At that time, it was still called luggable, but they became portable. And another, phenomena was that networking of computers started to emerge. So if you add these things together, you ask yourself the question, wouldn't it be great if computers can be wirelessly connected? And that was. It's very funny, but that was the invention of Wi-Fi. Sort of an insight in this makes sense, and then initially you get a lot of people asking you the question, why is this needed? Cables are easy, cables are reliable. Who in the world is waiting for computers being walked around and connected? And I remember also at that conference, I had my spouse sewing into my jacket a pocket, and I had a sharp laptop in my pocket. And I said, in the future, people will be able to pull their laptop out of their pockets and open it up and be connected to the network. I didn't know about smartphones at that time, but it's very interesting that you see this whole world kind of converging towards connectivity everywhere. And this was also, way before internet was mainstream. It was in the early days of email. It was way before Wikipedia existed, and Wikipedia I still consider as the brilliant invention of the internet, or the brilliant application of internet, sharing knowledge. Because I think that when societies evolve and grow and become smarter, it's because it's the collective knowledge of everybody that's building on top of each other, and that is kind of enabled by the internet, and Wi-Fi is an easy way to get on the internet. And the thing I can be blamed for is that early insight that getting easy on and off the internet would become vital. And it's funny to put it in perspective. I have a 19-year-old son, so he was born in 2001, and I think the major breakthrough of Wi-Fi was in the year 2000, or around year 2000. Yeah. So he never lived without internet or Wi-Fi. And if I ask him, do you know there was life before Wi-Fi? Actually, we had a discussion yesterday with my 14-year-old daughter, and she looked at me about life without a smartphone, and it's like. It's very interesting phenomena, right? When my daughter is 14, she has done more written communication than probably until I was 25, because with all the instant messaging that she does with all her friends. I mean, her verbal skills and her communication skills are just astounding, and she's always connected with friends. And in our days that was totally different. So it's amazing if you see what has happened with Wi-Fi and the breakthrough with Wi-Fi and how that has changed our life to a large extent to the better.
Yeah.
Some people say we want to go back to the life before. I have a funny story about it. My son-in-law, he was so fed up when he was listening to the American Senate hearings of Google and Amazon and Microsoft. He decided to get rid of his smartphone, and it lasted less than a week. And then he was begging my daughter whether he could use her smartphone because life without it had become totally impossible. It's kind of indicative on how connected the world is. And this is my slogan. My slogan is a connected world is a better world, because I believe, despite all the fake news and all the horror stories that you're hearing, a connected world is still better than a world that we are not connected. And that's a sort of underlying belief that I was very happy to contribute to with Wi-Fi. And that's in short a story. It's a lot of work, but the idea, the invention was very short.
Yeah, no, fantastic. It's funny you should say about your son, actually. So he's never heard a dial-up tone before. He's never had to plug RJ11 cables into sockets, and it's interesting how quick things move on, right? But no, absolutely, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So, guys, how does your team within Qorvo at the moment then? How do they really maximise the full potential of Wi-Fi 6? Because obviously this is something that's spoken a lot about in the community at the moment, and the advantages, etc. So what does your team do within that?
Yeah, well, let's put things in perspective for a second. First of all, I think Wi-Fi 6 is an interesting name, and actually it was adopted for the new standard in Wi-Fi. In the past, Wi-Fi never bothered numbering the standards, right? Because if you really count, it's the 7th generation. So if you have to call the first Wi-Fi 0, you end up with Wi-Fi 6 today. And the naming came a little bit after 5G. 5G, 4G, 3G did a really good of marketing effort, and Wi-Fi decided, well, we need to call out for a new name to give people some perspective on the growth. So they've decided to go to Wi-Fi 5 and Wi-Fi 4. All the rest of the Wi-Fi number is forgotten about. Doesn't matter anymore. But if you look through history, when we launched Wi-Fi in 1999, Wi-Fi 0 to a certain extent, Wi-Fi has gone up in data rates a factor 1,000.
Wow.
And so in 20 years, a factor 1,000 in data rate improvement. So if you asked me, what is the whole story about Wi-Fi? Wi-Fi contrasts with 3G, 4G, 5G, as Wi-Fi is the indoor communication channel. 3G, 4G, 5G is outdoor communication. You need a SIM card, you need somebody else's base stations, you need somebody else's services to use these base stations to connect to the internet. And it makes a lot of sense, right? It's like 5G is the freeway of outdoor, and in your house you think you own your own ether, and therefore you can use your own technology, and you don't need a subscription, you don't need a SIM card, and you still have the highest data rate and data communication in your house. Of course, you need access to your house with broadband or fiber, but if you put things in perspective, Wi-Fi in your house is what you use for being connected, and Wi-Fi 6 is just faster than Wi-Fi 5, than Wi-Fi 4, while still preserving range. Here's an interesting thing. The the battle in data communication is the higher the speed, the shorter the range. So the innovation from Wi-Fi 0 to Wi-Fi 6 is how can we go up in data rate? How can we go faster? How can we serve more people at the same time? And still avoid that the range reduces. Naturally, radios reduce in range if you go higher data rate. So you get the big story of gigabit per second access on 5G. Well, better be darned close to a base station, because if you're further away from the base station, your data rate goes down rapidly. And in particular, if you're indoor and you have to go through walls or go through glass to reach that outdoor base station, then then you lose a lot of data rate. So the challenge is always, how do I get higher data rate and preserve the range? And Wi-Fi 6 has done a few things together to get still that 10 gigabit data range, which is 1,000 times faster than the 10 megabit the first Wi-Fi's were, right? So the 10 gigabit, and how do we preserve that range? And to a large extent, that is done by expanding capacity and by using a concept that we call in Qorvo 1 pod per room. What people already had been doing is installing repeaters in their house or multiple access points, and it all became a little bit complex. You almost had to become half of a network engineer, and in Wi-Fi 6, that has completely simplified. You can have a repeater, we call it a pod, a repeater in every room, and that repeater talks with your router at the front door, and it's one network, it's one configuration, and all the internals are standardized now and connect your house together in every room with Wi-Fi 6, with higher capacity, with higher data rate, and still providing full indoor coverage. And I think if you ask me what's the key of Wi-Fi 6, that is the key of Wi-Fi 6. So higher data rates, still full coverage. You can almost guess, what would Wi-Fi 7 bring, right?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
It's a little bit of a treadmill, but there's a funny saying in between software and hardware. It doesn't matter how fast the hardware is, the software will always catch up. But that a little bit applies to networking as well. It doesn't matter, how fast you make the network. The applications will catch up and will need faster networks. So higher data rates, more capacity, and still preserving good indoor range. That is the name of the game in Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. I think it leads me on really nicely to my next question, actually, because clearly this year has been incredibly challenging for many people, and I guess with the events of 2020, do you think that the officeless office is here to stay? And if so, what is Wi-Fi's role within this? Moving forward, obviously with 6 and potentially the next release, how do you see this changing the working world?
Yeah. Well, first of all, a pandemic is a horrible experience that we kind of collectively are going through, and it's testing society, right? It's testing society from all angles, not only from an health and a healthcare perspective, but also from an economical perspective. And it's really kind of in a way a tough situation that is testing the resilience and is asking from people, is looking for inventing other ways. In a way, it is as horrible as it is to say, but it's a massive social experiment where essentially we are cut short in some areas and need to reinvent ourselves. But there is silver lining here. People were standing in traffic a lot. Were commuting, spending a lot of commuting time. And interestingly, small companies had already learned how to deal with with work from home in the past, because small companies have short communication lines, and if somebody said in a small company, hey, I will be more efficient if I can work from home tomorrow, there was never a problem, right? But large companies were always kind of concerned about working from home, the lack of oversight, the usage of new technologies like video conferencing. It was very funny. Qorvo is a large company, and just this year in February, we had hired a person to promote the usage of Teams to reduce the need for travel. Because there was that vague notion that if we use Teams more and video conferencing, then probably we can reduce travel costs. Well, this person had finished his job in a few weeks because with the pandemic, there was no choice.
Yeah.
And people are really to learn, that it is highly efficient to work from home, and it is highly efficient to use all the tools that were available, but that we kind of, for one or another reason, not yet had fully embraced. And this social experiment basically forced to use these new things. And I must say, even initially, people were very excited about working from home, using the tools, and productivity went up. We are now half a year later, a little bit in the, there are also drawbacks. People are struggling separating home life from work life. Not everyone has the proper setup at home to be able to work from home or to work so frequently from home. So after the initial enthusiasm, we are going through a phase of sobering up to a situation that work from home probably is going to stay. Because people also realized, all the commuting time, actually that was lost productivity one or another way. So people are catching up to the idea that work from home is going to stay there, and work from home has advantages, but we need to kind of learn how to deal with the disadvantages, and the disadvantages, need to be addressed. But circling back to Wi-Fi, I mean, you can only imagine that we have seen a steady increase in the need for better communication and better networking gear at home. And we have definitely seen a positive uptick in our business related to that. And we think that will continue for a while. It's very interesting, the arrival of Wi-Fi 6 and the arrival of COVID and this social experiment kind of collided into an acceleration of people upgrading their network or finding the need now to upgrade and the reason to upgrade. So we can definitely see that. And but we felt all along that Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi is here to stay. And is further facilitating work from home, and that's what we clearly see as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's really important as well within all of this is that the infrastructure stays stable from the operators right down to the technology itself, right?
Yeah.
To maintain that as we see an increased move to flexible working.
There's an interesting backdrop to this, because initially but also several other companies were wondering, can the internet sustain work from home, or will it come down crashing under the weight of the increased application? And it's very interesting that we have seen the internet holding up fairly well. And I think that's to a large extent due to that the internet was already tested by a lot of video applications. Yeah. People were using a lot of broadband for watching TV, for watching series at home. So in a way, the broadband network was already a sort of over-dimensioned to address that need. And the video conferencing and the work from home and we'll have to see the statistics in the coming year how that unfolded. But the addition of work from home to the broadband network actually seems really rather limited. So the internet was already quite well dimensioned for people watching videos at home, and therefore being able to deal with the additional work from home that we are seeing today. Doesn't mean that there is pressure, and there is increasing pressure now on the broadband companies to extend the quality and the capacity of the broadband network. But you see there's a similar race going on from DSL and cable to fiber. Yeah, so there is an increased or there's a comparable demand on increased network capacity that is somewhat complementary to the distribution of the network, and in particular Wi-Fi in the home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think recently we saw obviously some of the larger streaming services scaling back the compression rates of their video in order to keep stability, right? But it's very interesting, and obviously the increased appetite for content and the quality of that content, and what is being used on the internet today is heavily video orientated compared to what it used to be, right?
Yeah.
And as such, the requirement for data is increasing, astronomically. Cees, where do you see Wi-Fi in the next 5 years? Where are we going with this? What types of things can people expect to see from future releases and future standards being created? Yeah.
Well, I mentioned already Wi-Fi 7 that is being worked as a standard in the IEEE community, so to say. But there's also expected to be a somewhat of an intermediate release. It's called Wi-Fi 6E, so it's an extension to Wi-Fi 6. And Wi-Fi 6E is going to address the increased availability of bandwidth. As you probably have heard in the United States already, there's a new frequency band added to the unlicensed spectrum that is being used by Wi-Fi. It's called the 6 gigahertz band. It's very confusing. Wi-Fi 6 does not use the 6 gigahertz band. Wi-Fi 6 was there, and then the 6 gigahertz band was released. But the same standard as is being used for Wi-Fi 6 can be used in the 6 gigahertz band, but that standard is called Wi-Fi 6E. And as I mentioned, it's already released in the United States. Europe and the UK, Korea, Brazil are other kind of countries or areas, legislative areas that are looking to follow the United States in expanding the unlicensed frequency band, paving the way for Wi-Fi 6E. Wi-Fi 6E in a way is the same as Wi-Fi 6, but because it has more frequency, it can harbor more channels, and because it can harbor more channels, more people can simultaneously work on Wi-Fi. That is essentially the intermediate step of between Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7. Therefore, it's called Wi-Fi 6E. It's the same standard as Wi-Fi 6, but it has more channels, so more people can simultaneously use Wi-Fi 6. So think about large venues, convention centers, stadiums that will benefit from this in the first place. But we are also expecting to see that this will propagate into homes and into offices. And it's the same theme again, more capacity, more users having the same high bandwidth at the same time together, and therefore allowing higher speed connectivity. And it's all paving the way to Wi-Fi 7, which at this name is still kind of running around as .11be, a working group in the IEEE Standardization Committee for even higher data rates. People are talking about 40 gigabit per second right now to really move on to the next generation. So There's no rest for the wicked yet. We keep on going and defining newer and higher data rates because, as I mentioned, applications will catch up, and
Yes.
I mean, going a factor 1,000 in 20 years, we don't expect it will stop now. We expect. Well, will we expect another factor 1,000 in the coming 20 years? We don't know. We can't hardly even imagine the applications. But what we talked already about is, omnipresence and awareness and being connected all the time. I think in at least 10 years we'll kind of look back at the primitive quality of video connectivity that we have today. So we think there's still ways to go in higher data rates communication, and that's what we're working on and continue to work on.
Yeah, fantastic. Cees, thank you so much for joining the show. We really appreciate it, and thank you for your insights. It's great to have you on. Perhaps in the future, when we're at a future standard, when 7 is finally released and out there to the general public, perhaps we can talk again. But we really appreciate your time, and thank you once more.
You're very welcome.
All right.